Hello and welcome to Stories Across Borders. Here we discuss tales told across a variety of mediums, books, movies, games, TV, comics, you name it, and it will probably show up at some point. The only rule is that we can only discuss topics in terms of storytelling, acting, animation, music, anything like that is off limits unless it pertains directly to the way a story is being told. I am Daniel Radford, author, lover of stories, and also your host, and today I am once again joined by John Kernan as we continue our focus on disaster stories.
Yes, and we promise that our focus won't be a disaster. Nailed it.
Yeah, 100% the funniest thing you have ever said. And also didn't screw up my intro rhythm, not at all.
Nope, never.
In,
Wouldn't dream of it.
in particular, we'll be focusing on 2021's Don't Look Up, written and directed by Adam McKay, a movie that we absolutely did not only watch for the first time today, or in some people's cases, finished watching approximately 10 minutes ago.
Oh my god, he lived. I didn't know if there was going to be a thing after the credits, and there it was.
There it was. We were experiencing the end in real time, actually, as it turns out.
Oh god, the world is ending constantly. The only problem is it's not happening fast enough.
On that note, though, I do have to say I am disappointed in at least myself, but when I say myself, I mean both of us for not getting to this movie sooner. It is really good.
Oh, there's so many movies I need to watch. I never feel bad about not getting to something unless it's like tailor-made for me, because there's just too much.
That is also very fair. So, a brief rundown of the general gist of the movie for anyone listening is it is a satire that uses an impending comet collision with the Earth and the way society as a whole, and also a more specific cast of characters responds to that as an analogue for climate change and humanity's seeming indifference to our inevitable demise. Again, starting the first cycle with the happiest stuff we could find.
Only 98.86% inevitable demise.
Oh yeah, that's very important that we don't say 100.
True science never says 100%. Although, this is some true science I can say with. Did you know that 100% of people who've ever drank water have eventually died? So maybe water's not so great.
You're really bringing out your best jokes for this one, huh?
My most original ones, too. Things no one has ever said before.
Absolutely. Quality quality content for the audience today.
Only the best.
So, speaking of things that quality content, best segue. I really enjoyed that Don't Look Up. Like I said, I think it, despite being a satire, it is potentially my favorite disaster movie, actually. And it does cover a lot of what we sort of discussed in our broader discussion last week.
I think it strikes a really good balance between realism and absurdity.
I mean, the sad truth
A
is that
definitely not pretentious sentence.
no, not at all. I think the saddest part about it is just how real it is in so many ways, but also one of the best parts because as much as we don't want to admit it, reality is frequently absurd.
The quote "truth is stranger than fiction" exists for a reason.
Yeah, and I mean, within like roughly the first 10 minutes what you're getting into with this one.
Oh yeah.
I was captured so quickly. I think like that very first sort of scene where Kate finds the comet, and then like we cut to the sort of college PhD group led by Mindy, Randall Mindy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. As he sort of does the calculations and has the realization, and immediately goes from yeah we're having fun here to oh, uh-oh.
It's funny you had that little moment. I get tripped up by his name a lot too because the first half of the movie almost exclusively calls him Dr. Mindy, and they maybe bring up his first name once. And then
switch,
after
yeah.
that, they start almost exclusively calling him Randall, but they still call him Doctor. So I started to be like, wait, I thought Mindy was his last name. Was I wrong? His first name's not Mindy, is it? No, they would have made a joke about that at some point earlier. That can't be right.
Yeah, I think the reason for that is kind of twofold because I think it's supposed to partly show how like a bunch of people who are more strangers to him grew closer throughout the story of the movie.
Makes sense.
But also, secondly, it was him turning into a public figure and creating this weird parasocial relationship with people and becoming sort of a figurehead.
That was where it struck me as weird was when it was happening while he was on the television show because like when the people introduced him or called him, they didn't call him Dr. Randall Mindy. They just called him Dr. Randall, and I was like, what is this? Is this how you're supposed to segue into his cult of personality now? Which I guess
Kind
it
of,
kind of
yeah, I
was.
think that is actually what they were going for. He was, it was that sort of symbolic switch of Dr. Mindy, the serious scientist, to Dr. Randall, the fun TV guy who tells you about things.
Well, at least even at the worst of his power trip, he never decided to be the kind of psychotic, sociopathic egomaniac who would charge somebody for free snacks.
Yeah, we're gonna come back to that joke a lot.
So is the movie.
And it should. For those of who are uninitiated, as before we get back into the corruption arc, which is the centerpiece of the movie, we do have to appreciate one of the best gags ever, which is also kind of symbolic of the partly of the indifference people show towards the seriousness of the situation. Is that early on in the movie, when Dr. Mindy, Kate, and Dr. I'm going to pronounce his name wrong,
Oglethorpe.
Oglethorpe, uh, sort of sitting in a waiting room in the White House waiting to talk to the president. They have a general with them who's supposed to help give them credibility, and he does this, haha, by charging them for free snacks and then leaving.
Well, he had to be in Okinawa by 2 a.m.
Oh yeah, I'm sure what he had was very important, and the fact that he did this rich and powerful man was so petty and to have done that for no apparent reason.
Just rich and powerful too, but like seeming genuine and serious up to that point.
Yeah, not only is he a great example of the kind of people that you're going to be dealing with throughout the entirety of this movie, but the ridiculousness of that happening sticks not just with the audience but with the character Kate so much through the movie that through everything she keeps coming back to it and
Yeah.
just sort of going, why would he do that?
And I can't help but think that like it's partially because despite all the other crazy stuff that and much more significant stuff that happens in the movie, that's the most petty thing anybody does in the entire movie. He has nothing to gain from it. What's he give a shit about getting $20 from these people?
Yeah,
It's nothing.
it
He does it
is.
anyways.
In a movie that is full of incredibly selfish and petty actions, that one pointless petty act at the very beginning of the movie is somehow the pinnacle of it, and also just sums up the attitudes of almost everyone in power that we continue to deal with throughout the rest of the story. Because
And I love how casually they get to it too, because it's like such a dumb moment. She walks in, gets the thing out of the fridge, just looks at the lady who, God, I assume probably never gets a day off and has to like work 24/7. So she's got her laptop in the freaking kitchen with her.
yeah,
She's like, where do I pay for this? You don't you don't pay for a water bottle. This is the White House. And she just stares straight ahead for a second and then just walks into the next room
yeah,
to explain in like complete abject shock to the other people waiting there that she just realized a general of the United States military who was there to meet with the president with them for the sake of credibility just charged them, I think, a total of like somewhere between 25 and $30 for a couple bags of chips and water bottles for no reason.
and then just left.
And then left to go to Okinawa and probably say some really racist shit to an Asian stewardess on the way there on the plane.
Yeah, it is such a good gag, but it's simultaneously funny and just sets the tone for what is going to be happening throughout the rest of the story. Because again, like the crux of this story is essentially, I mean, it's given to you in the title. Is a small group of people who have realized we're doomed and are desperately trying to scream this message out to those in power and get them to do something about it.
And no matter how incontrovertible the evidence, no matter how eloquent their explanations, or how much data they have, nobody seems to care.
Unless it, helps them in some way.
Yeah.
Because that's it. Like the first, I think, sort of quarter of the movie is dealing with the fact that the president is more interested in a scandal that's happened with her Supreme Court nominee and how that will affect her power wise than she is in the literal apocalypse that is impending. And the
Well, of course. I mean, like, yeah, okay, so maybe some people will judge her a little harshly for not giving more attention to the potential end of the earth. But, like, what if people are calling the cowboy she put into the Supreme Court a child molester? What then? How will America survive this?
I mean, that's a more serious accusation, at least. It wasn't even that. I think it was just that he had, like, been in an adult movie or something.
I don't know. It's tough to say because there's like a lot of little things about him. I don't remember what they actually said, but that's just an example I thought of because when they finally showed him getting sworn in his dumbass black desperado hat, I thought he looked like a child molester.
Well, that's one hell of an indictment. But he probably deserves it. But yeah, so the first part of the movie is just uh, Mindy, Kate, and Oglethorpe just trying to deal with that, both at a personal level, trying to cope with it, and also at a humanitarian level, trying to get this woman to see sense. And
Bless Dr. Oglethorpe, best character in the movie.
he is fantastic. And then finally, she does, quotation marks, see sense and decide to actually take action. But it's not because of anything they've done. It's because she needs to do something to offset the scandal that is going on and get her polling back up. And the ideal method that she sort of had walk into her office is the impending doom of humanity, and it would look really good to solve that. But like even like you can tell that she still doesn't take it seriously, and neither is her horrendous son, who is also her chief of staff. Figure that one out yourselves, folks. Uh,
Hey, like nepotism aside, it's a really good plan, you know? The scientists can be trusted. We've got such great scientists. They'll figure it out. They'll send the mission off. And like the only way something could go wrong is if the man who donated so much money to making me president decided it was a bad idea because he could make more money if I didn't
oh,
destroy the
yeah,
asteroid. And
we haven't even gotten to that yet. That is a whole other can of worms. But
no, come on, don't worry. Like, what is it? It's just a little money. Who cares? I'm sure that there's never been a case, and never will be a case, of somebody having so much money that the money itself becomes the kind of power that it would allow them to talk down to a world leader and influence their decisions, right? Who's ever heard of anything like that?
that, that could never happen. Ha,
No,
ha.
absolutely not. That's why this movie is fictional because that would never. Sorry, had a little something.
Yeah. Anyway, you can tell at this point as well that they still aren't really taking the problem seriously. They're only really interested in what it can do for them because they pull a prank on our core characters to bring them into the White House to discuss this. They have the FBI show up at their houses or at their campus, or I think it's a coffee shop or something where they get Oglethorpe, and arrest them and put bags on their heads and drag them to the White House.
Which which is where my favorite joke in the movie comes in. Word out to Oglethorpe for legitimately, as he puts his hands up, scientifically explaining to the cops the process of how people became white people and why they should be rational and not, you know,
Yeah,
do the thing cops tend to do with people of a higher what is it? Melanin
Melanin,
count?
yeah, melanin. Yeah, because this movie isn't content at just taking shots at climate change deniers. It wants to get everybody if it can. The focus is still the climate change deniers, but I mean, if it can take a pot shot at racists, it's going to.
Why not? You should always take pot shots at racists, especially if you see racists outside your house and have something that can actual take literal physical pot shots at them.
We don't encourage actual violence here. Please don't get me sued.
Hey, they're pot shots. It's not violence. Pot shots don't actually hit people. It's not violence. It's just a threat of violence.
Oh, well, that's fine then.
We also don't advocate for threatening people.
No, not at all. We definitely don't advocate for putting bags on people's heads and dragging them to your house.
Jonah Hill does.
Jonah Hill does. Um, so that
Jonah
happens.
Hill advocates for it all day.
So that happens, and finally the gears start turning, and things seem to be moving in a positive direction where a plan is put into place. Again, largely centered around the optics, but at this point, our core cast of characters do not care about that. It's fine if this horrible person gets re-elected as long as the world is saved. They have their priorities.
Yeah, because there is legitimately not enough attention and focus to go around for them to call her out for what a terrible person she is without actively harming the ability for someone who is currently in power to actually work on fixing this problem. So,
Yeah,
you know,
they're stuck between a
it
rock and
can
a hard
wait till
place.
after the apocalypse is averted.
Yeah, so they're working on this. They get their figurehead hero, who is a stupid, racist ex-army guy, who is unaware that he is basically being put up to die to make this woman look good.
What do you mean racist? He said he wanted to say hi to all the Indians out there.
He also
He
said
even
both
included the
kinds.
gays. Yeah, exactly. See? He's being all inclusive. He even brought in the gays, and they're not a race.
Stand-up guy.
Uh, he's more than a stand up guy. I would call him a rocket ship. He doesn't just stand up, he flies up
The lack of
into
sleep is beginning to
space.
show.
What do you mean? You say that like it's 6:40 in the morning.
Honestly, it's just nice that this is happening to someone who's not me for a change. Um, but yeah, whilst all this is going on, we also start to get into what we referenced earlier, where our protagonist of sorts, Dr. Randall Mindy, kind of goes through a corruption arc as we watch the process of how a person can become turned into the sort of person that the president is, or that her son is, or her rich friend, who we'll get to later, is.
It's so sad, too. That reporter wasn't even as attractive as his wife.
Uh,
What do you
it's
mean I'm missing the point?
no, you're always right on the ball, but it really is tragic because he does start out so well-meaning, and as they continue to focus on him and inflate his ego and give him more control and power and money and put him in the spotlight more, he starts becoming less and less of a person.
Yeah, and
Certainly
it's
a
an
good
interesting
person.
thought, too, because even at his worst, he doesn't, like, fully lose sight of trying to stop the comet from happening. He, of course, as people always do when they're falling in that sort of situation, especially if you're part of a corruption arc with an author who wants to make a point, he does get his priorities mixed up and, you know, lose the thread, but he doesn't fully let it go, which is, I think, the only reason he's able to make a comeback later is that he's still at least trying, even at his worst.
Yeah, he never fully commits to becoming the worst he could be, which is good because again, like that little strand is the only thing that he's able to grasp onto to climb out of the hole he has dug himself by the toward the end of the movie. But you can tell, like his fall from grace as well. It's not a pretty one. Not only does he cheat on his wife and very fairly get abandoned by her, uh, you can see the fame get into his head, and then he makes, and that's when the billionaire friend comes in because as all this is happening, just after they've launched the mission to intercept the comet whilst they still have a chance, suddenly the pilot turns around because the president's billionaire friend, who absolutely has no control over her, none at all, none whatsoever.
Oh, no, no, no.
She's not just a figurehead for the rich, haha.
How could anybody ever uh be that? I mean, when has money ever led to power or corruption?
Never, absolutely never. Uh, but yeah, he comes in and he's realized, thanks to his own crack team of scientists, that this thing is made of a lot of really valuable stuff that he could convert to profit.
A thing we already knew, mind you, because pretty much every space rock, as far as we can tell,
At
is
least
filled with minerals. Because I
so
mean,
far.
spoiler alert, rocks are minerals. In case anybody didn't know that, so when you see a space rock, that's probably some minerals up there in space.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think a lot of it is iron, which, people don't think of iron as particularly valuable, but it is.
Iron, I mean, this is a bit of a weird way to put it, and not entirely accurate, but close enough to the truth for me to want to say it to save time going into detail. Iron is kind of like the water of metals. It's like
It's in
the
everything. Yeah.
it's in everything. It's the baseline. It is you don't really have any metal without iron. Even the ones where they never bring up iron are only different things because of refined versions of iron combining with other minerals to make new things and alloys. Iron
Yeah.
is in all of it. It's kind of important.
Yeah. So, which is just a hint that this guy's not really a scientist and he's just building himself up to look like the science innovator guy.
And then if you want the WrestleMania
Something
sign
to
that just
think
flat
about.
out tells you he's not those things, he's a Steve Jobs analog.
Yeah, it was interesting they leaned more into Steve Jobs because I think realistically he was meant to be a parallel to someone else who is, you know, alive. Anyway, so he comes in.
I feel like I'm losing the thread. Maybe it's just because of how much older they are, but my brain only ever puts Bill Gates and Steve Jobs on the same level, and I think shockingly I actually think Bill Gates is better than that.
Oh no, Bill Gates is much better than that. Uh, anyway, um, yeah, so he's had this realization and he's managed to convince the president to call everything off. And Mindy kind of, you can tell he's at his worst, like the I want to say peak, but it's the inverse of that, and I've forgotten the word. He's at the lowest point of his corruption arc here because he goes along
Ellie.
with this. He, at least surface level, goes along with this idea because, oh, that money can end world hunger and all these things, like it would go to any of those people. And he
Well, and
uses.
also like yeah, he's definitely at least partially thinking like, well, if I just outright go against them, they'll just kick me off the project like
Yeah,
everyone
I mean, he
else.
outright says that when he's breaking the
Yeah.
news to Kate and Oglethorpe at that bar. And they both very fairly are pissed off about this whole eventuality, and Kate openly tells all the people in the bar this when they start asking questions, and sets off a chain of riots. And maybe starting a bunch of riots was not the best approach, but it was arguably a realistic response, and that's one of the things I genuinely appreciate about Kate throughout the movie, is that Kate is our audience stand-in a lot of ways. She is the
Hate's the
normal
real one.
person, effectively, who is trying to cope and deal with all of this, and it
While
takes a
unfortunately being
toll.
hopelessly involved too, because as we might not have mentioned, even
Oh
if Mindy
yes,
was kind of like the boss on that project, she's the one who discovered the
yeah,
comet. It's named after her.
yeah.
Even after the world decides to shove her in a dark little corner and try to forget she exists, they don't change the name of the comet.
They don't, and that I mean, yeah, I mean that if ever you needed like a perfect way to like a perfect example of how Mindy falls into that position of being the figurehead. It's that it's Kate that made the discovery, and it's Kate that continues throughout the entire movie to have, despite having no real power, futilely, desperately fight against the institution to try and get people to just, do something about the end of the world.
Well, the institution has to choose him as the figurehead. He's the white guy.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like that was the point.
The other two have these horrible problems where Kate has ovaries and a vagina, and Dr. Oglethorpe has extra melanin in his skin and is of a different descent.
I really hope that doesn't get cropped and used against us.
And also, I don't think those other people knew that he had such a cute cat. Otherwise, maybe they would have rethought that.
But yeah, as
It
if
was
as if
really
the
cute
movie
and fluffy.
wasn't making its point clear enough. It's that even with a woman president in charge, the institute is still the institution of the government itself is still very much geared towards a certain subset of rich and powerful people, of which some of our core cast are not a part of. Don't Look Up does not pull punches with its commentary on society.
Some would say it is quite on the nose with those punches, which I hope you have either a strong jaw or a very laissez-faire attitude about watching a movie like this, because it is good. Don't get me wrong,
But
but
it is
if
not
the
subtle.
wrong if the wrong parts of it hit you in the wrong ways, you're not going to enjoy it, as evidenced actually by a friend of ours who really can't think of anything to say about it other than that it's too on the nose, and he can't seem to look past that. And I don't 100% blame him, because it's definitely not subtle. If that's the kind of thing that impacts your enjoyment, you're probably not going
I
to
mean,
enjoy it
the
that
thing
much.
about satire, though, is that it often isn't subtle, and that's kind of the point.
Yeah, in fact, satire is generally explicitly hyperbolic, which is almost kind of why the movie doesn't feel too on the nose to me. Because the problem with when somebody calls something on the nose for me in a negative context like that, not that on the nose isn't sometimes in a negative context for real. When I hear on the nose, I think too direct, too serious, too exact. And this movie's not exact. It's hyperbolic. It goes beyond on the nose or serious and into like asinine, ludicrous, silly levels of the stuff going on. Like, don't get us wrong, as realistic as this movie is in a lot of ways, it also intentionally goes beyond the bounds of
It
reality,
it
because
it
if it didn't, it
dials
would just be depressing.
yeah, it dials things up just enough to touch into the realms of absurdity, but it still stays close enough to baseline reality to not become absurdist.
Yeah, thankfully that's not that hard when reality itself is so ridiculous on a day-to-day basis, especially if you're dumb enough to spend more than 5 minutes a week on Twitter or Facebook,
Why are you calling me out like this?
because it's an inescapable part of modern life and I hate it.
Uh, so yeah, that happens. Everyone goes insane. Kate starts having a kind of a meltdown and is blessedly kind of kept sane by this guy Yule, who is kind of a weird figure. She just happens to run into and just starts hanging out with his crowd because fuck it, the world's gonna end. Where he is,
Yeah.
he at first comes across as just like a complete douche, like like the embodiment of that character trope. And then
And to
within
a
like,
point he is. Like
which to a
the
point
douche
he
the
is,
douchiness isn't a lie, but there's more to him than that.
yeah. At the same time, he is religious, which was surprising. But
And in
in a good
a
way.
nice touch, came to that conclusion on his own,
Yeah,
and in a honestly like respectable way. I mean,
he is
he's got his own flaws, but as far as his faith goes, I think that's kind of the way people should be faithful if they're going to do it.
for sure. He is actually weirdly an example, like despite the sort of douchiness, is weirdly an example of the good parts of humanity, and I kind of like that that is like who he is and how he acts are in such contrast in a lot of ways. Um,
Yeah, and I think the way Kate ends up spending more time with him is actually well pulled off too, because like at first it's just her kind of giving up on life and being like, "Ah, fuck it, whatever." But I think it's good because one thing I think that's a major element of this movie, which I think is always going to be a major element of any significant disaster, but especially anything that's like apocalyptic level, is the way the movie shows off different shades of nihilism and how different characters express things like that. And we even see multiple different characters go through different shades of nihilism differently throughout the movie. But Kate is the one who goes through the most of it because she literally goes all the way from pessimistic, what's the point nihilism to like,
Positive nihilism of, well, I'm
yeah,
here, I
like
might as well enjoy
happy,
the time I
good,
have left.
positive, live in the moment nihilism. And the one who pulls her out of that pessimistic nihilism and gets her to be in the positive scope of it is Yule.
Exactly. It's kind of an example, a very good example of what we talked about last week. Of there's always that little bit of hope present that makes you like gives you a that makes you care. Shows you that there is still good going on in the world, even with all this horrible stuff happening. There is still
Yeah,
reasons to do things. It does. It like this movie is a one of the things I really like about it is that it really embraces the showing humanity at its worst and at its best. Because
absolutely.
yeah, because like it's the little things that show you that it's Yule being so surprisingly sweet and pleasant and caring and uh, genuine in a movie that's full of people who are just plastic as hell.
Yeah, absolutely. My
Well,
other,
it's in
the only one, sorry, go ahead.
no, I'll say it's also in something you brought to my attention is that the main characters, when they're talking about this horrible thing in public locations, are constantly stopped by random people who go, "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Showing us that, there are people who actually care about this shit. It's just that they're not in a position of power to do things about it. And it's almost horrible in a way watching the main characters, like the Mindy and Kate and Oglethorpe, continuously telling these people right up to that scene in the bar a lie, like, no, don't worry, it's fine, it's for a game or something. They're trying to protect people from what they're experiencing, but at the same time, as we finally see when Kate lose it at the bar, is you have to tell people, and because it's the people have to mobilize to make the people at the top do something. And it's a shame that all that comes too little too late.
There's another layer to that I would say too, which I find interesting because it creates a little bit more contrast. Is there's also more pettiness to the aspect of it too, because there's also that feeling of like people talk to each other about crazy shit all the time. So even though they're talking about the actual end of the world, there's also that element of like somebody walking up and butting into your conversation, like, who the
Yeah,
hell are you? Get out of my face. Talking about important stuff over here. Mind your own business. But so that you literally have to contrast that with the also genuine feeling of, oh God, well at least someone cares.
for sure. So that's what's going on with Kate at that sort of latter part of the movie. Oglethorpe kind of fades out a
He's
little bit, I
actually the
feel.
most static character.
Yeah,
He doesn't go through any meaningful changes. He's the same person at the beginning of the movie as he is at the end and in the middle.
yeah. He's kind of a very stable center point because whilst we see the pessimism and the optimism, I feel like he is kind of representative of realism in a lot of ways, where he's just gonna
Yeah,
do his best. He's gonna try the
he's
right thing
actually
and
the
make
other
a
one I was going to
difference.
bring up when I was mentioning nihilism. Except he doesn't go through the spectrum. He starts and ends at this sort of like middle ground where he's doing his best, he's trying to make things better, and all that stuff. But then when Kate and Mindy start arguing, he's the first one to bring up points against both of them. When there's nothing left to say, nothing left they can do, he's also the first one to start walking away, being like, "Okay, well, I got other stuff. I got other stuff going on. We're done here." And he's the one who, despite fighting to make the world a better place, also takes his time that we even get to see on screen in the movie to sit down at home and watch the TV for a while for shit that's not about the end of the world and like pet his cat.
Yeah, he has. I think like some of that could easily be misconstrued as him being another one of the people who don't really care, but it's actually the opposite. He's what Oglethorpe represents is a healthy mindset in dealing with all this horrible shit.
Exactly. He knows his limits. He doesn't dive all the way in far enough to snap himself. He does everything he can, and then he takes a breath and allows himself to heal instead of diving straight into the void
It's
and
why he
seeing what
doesn't
happens.
allowing him that space, like putting all that into it, fighting the good fight, but still allowing himself that space to be a human and relax is why he's the only one who doesn't crack.
Exactly.
Uh, at this point, whilst that's going on with those two, we still have our good friend Dr. Mindy, who is now realizing what he's got himself into after his wife has left, and he's being bombarded with things. He's realizing that these people don't actually care. I mean, he always knew really, but I think he starts realizing the extent of it, and he at this point hits where Kate was at the start of the movie. And just snaps, and even like repeats some of her actions, where he just starts screaming at people to get their shit together.
Well, I mean, some of them care. You know, the reporter rubbed his leg sensually
She
during
cares
the
about the
interview.
wrong things. Uh, yeah. So he, finally implodes, and he eventually, or rather, or explodes. One of the two. Something bad ending with plode happens to him, uh, and he steps away. He finally just goes, "I can't be involved with you people," and he rejoins the effort. Uh, they all Oglethorpe, he and Kate, they finally start making things happen. They mobilize society. They reach out to other nations. They hold a charity concert with a pop star who they met earlier on a talk show when they
Who
were
I only
very
realized from the
first.
credits is Ariana
Yeah,
Grande.
when they were very first trying to break the news to the world, and it's one of my that song is one of my favorite things in the movie because it's almost like the plot of the movie in a condensed form where there's a bunch of
I mean, it
meaningless
does
crap.
share a title with the movie. Or
Truly,
well, I should say it's a tweak on the title of the movie.
yeah.
The actual of the title of the movie comes from the president's hashtag to counter them.
uh, as if she wasn't enough of an analog. They even have hats. um
Don't look up. Make belief in comics not falling great again.
but I love that the scene of the song because it is basically the microcosm of the movie where they start out, trying to gloss over everything and couch things in very pretty poetic language and drop meaningless crap in there and stuff like that. And then partway through the song, she completely drops the facade and literally just like starts singing at listeners to just get their heads out of their asses and do something.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the president and her little entourage and her horribly Oedipal son are just run out of ideas to even try to be flowery and actually just like brazenly shit talking the protesters to their own audience
Yeah,
as if they were it gives you this funny feeling. I don't think they would have literally done it because they didn't make no sense, although the framing's ambiguous enough that it could be true. But the scene is shown to us, at least in a way that not only like mirrors the two scenes, but almost literally makes it seem as if both rallies are like right next door to each other. You almost get the vibe that they can literally hear each other
yeah.
from where they're sitting.
You can feel the divide. between the people who care and the people who are in it for themselves. And I think it is important to note that there was far more people at that concert than there were at the president's rally.
Yeah, Ariana Grande was singing.
I mean, it does help, but I mean, the point is clear that it is a minority of people who are going to doom us all.
Yeah, those people just happen to have all the money
Yep.
and power.
Anyway, finally things start happening. Other nations start pulling their resources since the president isn't going to do anything helpful on their end. They're more interested in the money. People start realize the comet becomes visible, very visible in the sky, and people start realizing that they've been had, that they're screwed. This is real, but uh, it's
But
too
at the same
late.
time, that gives us
The
hope,
secondary
right? Because
operation.
everybody's seen it. We're finally going to do things. Things are going great. Even if the president's not going to help, the rest of the world will until we are very brazenly told without being told that the the I don't even want to say the American government at this point. I want to say the Apple private military organization and their assistants, the president and her cronies, um, might have not so subtly actively sabotaged the other country's efforts to send their own ships. Not just tried to beat them or not help them, but actively prevented them from succeeding.
Yeah, I did wonder about that because there's not really anything in the movie that actively says that or anything like that, or even hints at it really.
But at the
But it
same time,
seems
without
real
being told,
suspicious.
without even us being told how it could have possibly gone wrong, we are shown like their main operation literally just exploding.
Yeah,
Like it doesn't fail to work. The ship doesn't like launch and go off
it just
course.
explodes,
Their
and
explosives aren't weak enough. It's just, oh look, the thing they were doing went boom. It's not gonna happen now.
yeah, very suspicious. Uh, so they're then left at a point where their only hope is that the selfish, self-centered mining, split it up and mine it operation actually works. That's their
Yeah.
only hope.
I
Uh,
can't believe it wasn't bad enough for Steve Jobs to fill Indonesia and China with phone parts and half abandoned factories to the point where their environments are hopelessly destroyed. He had to also screw them over when they might impact his ability to make more phones in other countries. Sorry, not Steve Jobs. This guy's not Steve Jobs. I'm sure the real Steve Jobs was at least slightly a better person than this guy,
it would not
although
be difficult to be a better
he
person
did
than this guy.
he did make Apple though, so he can't be that great.
Oh, we're opening a can of worms with that one.
Sorry, I don't want to talk shit about Steve Jobs. You should not talk shit about dead people. I will stick to talking shit about Apple, the living, still existing
Oh,
corporation
I
that I
mean,
despise.
I think there's a lot of people who deserve some shit talking, but I don't know. I don't have time to go through my list.
This podcast is not political, it's about writing. Although, sorry, politics factor in a lot into writing and how it's relevant. So here we are.
Especially when you deal with the genre of satire, which primarily exists to make political statements. We're
Yeah, I
starting
mean,
out with all the easily consumable content.
yeah, few people, satire comes to us from the immortal bard himself, who, of course, was a great, great speaker of politics because he also invented the word fuck, let us not forget, which comes from being an acronym for fornication under consent of the king, which is in itself literally political satire.
So, thank you, Shakespeare, for giving us the best word to ever exist. Um,
Uh, there's a reason he's immortal.
did we determine if he was secretly Aristotle or not yet?
You never know. Well, we might have to wait till Assassin's Creed becomes real to figure that one out.
I think we may have just stumbled upon our first running joke. Um,
Always a fun one.
but yeah, at this point, that's the only hope they've got left. Our main cast of characters have all come back together at this point and sort of made up. And they've realized that there's no way in hell this is going to actually work.
Even if it does, they can have no more influence over it one way
Yeah.
or the other. So why worry about it?
Uh, so they've reached this almost it's almost an alarming like point of serenity because it's disturbing that they've reached a point where they don't care anymore. Like really don't care anymore, and that they're just going to focus on the good that they have whilst they still have it for that short amount of time. So as the
It's a horrifying thought to imagine accepting the end of the world, but the same way that, like, to find true peace, you have to accept the fact that you're going to die one day. That, like, once it becomes clear it's completely inevitable, or even not necessarily inevitable, but that you yourself cannot change the outcome anymore, no matter what you do, why not just
yeah,
do what you can do instead?
it's it's simultaneously like this really nice thing that they've reached this point of peace where they're like, well, we're all going to die, let's just enjoy the time we have. But it's also really sad that we've gotten to a point where fighting just isn't an option anymore. And I think like that hits hard, and I think that's kind of a point is that the movie is very like it doesn't have to say it because you feel it. We don't want to get to that point, but we're pretty damn close.
Yeah, it's a
And
sad thought.
sure enough, the operation fails, the comet collides, everyone dies except, of course, the handful of rich people who cared only for themselves and managed to get themselves out, including the president who abandoned her son.
She didn't abandon him, she forgot him.
In this context, same thing. Uh,
I know, but I love that moment when he's just talking to her on the phone and just being like, "Yeah, okay, well, I hope you and Jason have a good time." And she just goes like, "Jason?" And she's silent for like 5 seconds, and then just goes, "Oh shit!" And
yeah, like
we just cut to
it,
her sad little son being the last one in the mission room, just staring at the floor,
the
going,
one
"She's
he
coming
he
back."
is the one person as well. Like she's left this guy sitting in this room alone in mission control, just sitting there going, "She's coming back. She's coming back," trying to convince himself when he knows it's not true. She's left him there, the one person who genuinely, even if it was a little fucked up, who genuinely cared about her and
And believed in her too.
and believed in her. The only person who really felt that for this woman, and she's left. She's been so wrapped up in her own success and survival that she forgets him and leaves him behind to die while she and her rich buddy escape on a spaceship. Not that it helps them in the end, because as again, subtlety not a strong suit with this movie. They do arrive after being like cryogenically frozen on an Earth-like planet, some several light years away, and they get out, and all the old rich people are immediately attacked and eaten by the local wildlife because they were always screwed.
The good news is the human race probably continues to go on at least a little bit unless that planet's really, really bad. Because out of those 2,000 people, they weren't all old. There probably weren't very many, if any of them, who were good people. But, you know, we've all seen the cycle 1,000 times in 1,000 different stories. Even if none of the ones that survive are good people, probably a couple people survived. Maybe going through that makes them better. If it doesn't, maybe their children are better. The human race has endless variety.
Yeah, I mean,
Hopefully there's hope for the future and it goes on, but like, I mean, what do we care? We're all dead.
yeah,
We're the little people and
I
we
mean,
died.
I do think the point it's trying to hammer home there is that all those people who are in it for themselves, in the end, they're still gonna die.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a great strategy to survive and make sure the human race thrives and continues on and repopulates, right? Let's make sure over half of the people on our arc through space are too wrinkly and arthritic to even properly bang, let alone actually have kids. The thing we need to do if we want to continue to exist, I'm sure those 80-year-old people with their liver spots and lumbagos will be super helpful in
And yeah,
establishing a
rebuilding
new
society from the ground
society.
up. All those very old, very rich people who have never done anything for themselves.
Well, and even if they had, like, oh, I'm sorry, you know, your money and power got you on this ship. What's it gonna do for you on the new planet? Wait,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
nothing.
Are you gonna pay the alien ostrich not to peck your eyes out and make Mr. Apple write about how you were gonna die?
Yeah,
Because I don't think the space ostrich cares.
no, it definitely doesn't. As a
I
bunch of
think
them
all
just
the space
blew on its head.
ostrich knows is that you've got salt on your skin, and more importantly, meat underneath that skin.
Yeah, all they know is these strange things that fell from the sky look edible, and sure
And
enough,
they
they
don't
were.
seem to be smart enough to run away.
And that, yeah, and that is the happy note the movie ends on. It is. I mean, it is hilarious as long as you don't think of how depressingly real it is.
On the upside, our communist comrades can be happy that even if the human race doesn't go on, a new form of humanity obviously will, because those space ostriches are our final goal. They're eating the rich, just like we always said.
Mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished. The rich are being eaten. Everything's gonna be okay.
But yeah, it is such a good movie, and it highlights just like just so many of the things that we talked about, like that are central to the disaster genre, and what like at least good disaster stories, what makes them so fantastic, because it gives us the best and the worst of humanity. It gives us a small cast of characters to like focus the story around, because we do care like we get to know and care about uh Mindy and Kate and Yule and Oglethorpe and Mindy's wife, I guess, by
You mean
extension.
Randall's wife? She is also a Mindy.
Uh and as a dark mirror of that, we also care about the president and Jason and not Steve Jobs, in the sense that we hate them because they are terrible people. And we can relate to the way, like, I mean, there's a few different reactions, but there's going to be someone whose reaction you can relate to, and you just hope that the one you relate to isn't the president, because that's not a good sign for you as a human being. But
Nope.
I mean, for me personally, I think uh, I related easiest to Kate, and I think a lot of people will feel that same way, with that sense of just watching her screaming in a wall until she cannot bring herself to care anymore. Because we've all we've all been there.
I
She's
am both proud of and a little bit concerned of the fact that I think the one I relate to the most is probably Oglethorpe, other than the fact that he is definitely smarter than me.
uh I mean, I think that just means that you are in a healthier place than a lot of other people.
Maybe. It does make me worry about being a little more detached from things than I should be, though. Because Oglethorpe is a lot of things. He's not quite as grounded as he could be. Mostly for the better, to be fair, but it's not always a
Yeah,
good thing.
sometimes you'd like it to be panicked just a little bit more.
Yeah,
He's very
yeah,
zen. I
exactly.
mean, he obviously cares because he's fighting the same, just as hard as Kate is, and as
But he
Randall
just
is, but
doesn't have it in him to freak out and break down and scream like everybody else. Why would he bother doing that?
it's not
If he doesn't
productive.
have anything useful to do, then he may as well sit down with Kitty and watch his stories.
We should all aspire to reach that level of peace within ourselves.
I have. My cat's right by my feet right now.
Uh, Mine are locked away in the other half of the house because they're loud and annoying and would interfere with recording. Uh,
They have to be. They're Australian cats. They need to be
ouch.
able to warn their family when the parade of emus is coming. Somebody has to protect their family from the emus. The military didn't
Emus.
manage to do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that it was space ostriches that killed all the rich people. Uh,
Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. That's not to shit talk the Australian military. What are you supposed to do when an emu is running at you? If you hit it anywhere other than the head, it may as well be bulletproof. And good luck hitting its head. It's tiny, dangling all over the place, and is also
and
one of the things
actively
that's going to
trying to
kill
pick your
you
eyes out.
when it gets close. I wouldn't want to fight an emu
No, wouldn't recommend it.
or a
Uh,
cassowary.
oh no, yeah. If an emu is the heavyweight, uh, the cassowary is the trained killer. But yeah, the other thing that I really liked, like the other thing I really, I mean, I like a lot of things about this movie clearly, but one of the things that I also appreciated was that it was a very nice balance of the like duality of inevitability that we talked about last time as well.
I was
That
right about to bring that up too. Yeah, yeah.
it's the the natural inevitable force of there is a comet coming and it's going to hit. Nothing is going to change the fact that that comet is there.
With also the other side of the coin in that if we had just committed and been more reasonable as a species, we still might have been able to do something about that just because that comet was already there and its arrival was inevitable
Didn't mean
doesn't
our
mean we
destruction
didn't
was
still
going to be,
have
yeah.
a choice for what to do. We literally get to see both sides of the coin of like the natural inevitability or destiny or fate or whatever you want to call it of something that is going to happen no matter what, but also at the same time the inevitability that people could have changed the course of events and they didn't.
Exactly.
The
Uh,
very choices they made led to things happening exactly as they were always going to happen, even though it could have gone differently.
for sure. And because of that human element, we also get a good example of incorporating a traditional tragic figure in a lot of ways, thanks to Randall Mindy, who we see start in a pretty good place, uh, fall, not because of pride, which was a interesting sort of change, but simply because he's kind of just got a weak personality as his flaw. He's very
Legitimately
he gets
not
pulled along.
strong-willed enough to handle the situation he was
Yeah.
thrown into.
And because
Which I like, they show that off from the beginning of the movie when, despite the fact that she's the one who cracks first because of all the other stuff that's going on, when they're first getting into everything, Kate is the one who's ready and prepared and solid and knows what she wants to say and how she wants to say it and is
yep,
gonna like talk to the people while Randall is kind of sitting there just being along for the ride and being like, oh, okay, but oh God, what do I say? What do we do? And is being all intimidated and flustered.
yeah, for
So,
sure. Kate is
which
Kate is
I think
definitely by
it,
far a stronger person than he is, and I think that is why she really fights compared to Randall, who kind of gets pulled along by that movement and then pulled along by the don't look up movement and then
which is so funny
eventually
because
cracks and finally hits Kate level.
despite the fact that she's the one with the stronger will, because she's the one who's actually fighting harder against essentially a waterfall while he's the one who starts out going with the flow. The stronger one is the one who cracks first because she's stronger, while while he gets swept away later, and instead of cracking and breaking suddenly like she does, is eroded by the current, much like much like a small rock floating through the river until it gets sanded down into a little pebble, while the big rock gets swept straight into the bank and dashed against it to break.
Yeah, it's they as characters both have really interesting psychologies, and it is almost a tragedy in and of itself that because of who they are, it is Kate who bears the brunt of the of how messed up the situation is, whereas Mindy gets to be dragged along by the force and not take it all at once the same way. And I think it is that's just part of the story and part of the analogy is that the people who are fighting hardest are the ones that are feeling the feeling the suffering and the problem the most. But
Yep.
at the end, they still have to keep fighting for as long as they can because
Yeah,
there is always
absolutely.
that tiny element of hope.
You could even say Mindy
But
is like slightly
sometimes
more
there's not.
tragic because Mindy doesn't. Once he falls into his bad place, he doesn't come back from it until it is literally too late.
Yeah,
It takes the acceptance that the fight is over and they're all gonna die for him to finally see some sense, gather together the last friends he has left on Earth, that being Kate and Ogle. My brain's trying to say Oglebaum. It's getting his name mixed up now.
Oglethorpe.
Oglethorpe and Kate, who are his last two friends, because surely he
Featuring
has other
Yule.
friends. But yeah, surely he has other friends. But at this point, who could he really think to be with him in his last moments, other than the only people who really fought with him to keep it from happening in the first place, and
And his family, yeah.
just get them together, knowing it's already too late, and all they can do is accept their fate to just get together. What's important? Who's important? Seek forgiveness, which his wife gives him when she might otherwise not have,
And would have been completely justified in not doing it, but she's.
because she's accepted her fate in the same way and would rather also spend her last moments with the people she's loved the most throughout her life, which, whether he did wrong or not, includes him, and they have themselves their last little family dinner.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about earlier. It is, yeah, it's simultaneously like it's good to see them not hurting anymore and at peace with things, but it's also so sad to see that this is where they've ended up. These people who have
And not just where
fought
they've
so
ended up,
hard
but
for
that,
not
like,
just
they
themselves
got
but
there
for
too
everybody.
late, because they could have done this sooner,
Yeah,
and it wouldn't have been so sad, it wouldn't have sit as hard, but at the same time, if it hadn't gotten to this point, they might not have ended up here at all.
yeah. I mean, because they realistically they could only have had a couple of hours a day at most collectively of that piece, and like they gave up more of that time uh for everybody else's sake, which they talk about, they reference when they're listening to that song.
That's something that's really evergreen as far as metaphors and analogies go. I'm personally of the belief, as someone who rarely ever listens to music because I don't have quite the right brain for it, and much like with every other source of media, whether I like it or not, there is so much more than I could ever hope to consume. I like to think that there's a song for everything. If there's a message you want to communicate, especially if you want to communicate in a flowery, melodic way, there's probably already a song out there with lyrics that says what you want to say. And
Yeah, and I
music
mean,
will never fail to be perfect
happens
for analogies and metaphors.
happens twice in this movie there, and yeah, they that song basically, as they're driving to the grocery store to pick up the stuff for this last meal, perfectly encapsulates what is happening, and it's as it leads into this very poignant scene as we jump back and forth between their meal and the failure of the Not Apple's mission. Uh, it is this really poignant moment of that these people have given up so much that this is all they have left. This time is all they have left. And they could have had so much longer if they'd given up earlier, but they didn't.
Because how could
They
they?
fought. Yeah, how could they? They fought so hard and gave that up for society as a whole, only for it to be meaningless in the end because the powerful was desperate to cling to their wealth and power and to grasp for more of it.
Well, the Egyptians taught us a long time ago that wealth and power are very helpful to you in the afterlife.
Yeah, worked out well for ancient Egypt.
Then again, even by Egyptian standards, these rich and powerful people fucked up because if you want to take your stuff to the afterlife with you, you got to be buried with it. You can't be buried under a pile of flames and ashes and rubble with all your stuff burnt. Dumb rich people.
But yeah, I think Don't Look Up uses satire and the disaster genre beyond that masterfully to tell a very important story and send a very clear, pertinent, and important message. So I don't think stories necessarily need to have a moral or a message to be good, but a lot of the best ones are. And after watching this movie, I would quite happily list it up there with amongst some of the best, at least in this genre. It's probably my favorite disaster movie because of how poignant that message is sent and how masterfully it uses the tools at its disposal.
I could definitely feel the same way. Not that it has a lot of competition for me, because despite that fact that I think disaster as a concept is so interesting to write and to explore, disaster um stories, I guess, aren't really super high up on my list of favorite genres, which is funny because I guess it's probably just because most of my favorite examples of exploring disasters don't make the disaster as central as a proper disaster story does or tends to. But movie's good. So even if I were a little more cultured on this subject, it would still be up there.
Yeah, it is fantastic. And on that note, we have been going for a little over that sort of 1 hour mark, so we are going to wrap things up there. Uh, thank you for listening, people. You can find me at Twitter at Daniel Writes 7. That 7 is important. I don't know who the other 6 are, but they got there first.
Screw those guys.
And
All six of
yeah, that.
them.
And I was joined by John Kernan, who is a voice actor and narrator, and surely has plenty of bright things to plug on the horizon, but I believe nothing right now.
No, it's gonna have to wait until I get a new mic. I mean, I'm here doing the podcast, but this mic is definitely not voice acting quality. If anyone were to hire me right now without giving me a nicer mic first, it would probably turn into one of those roles where somebody would be like, "Oh yeah, I like what this guy says. Why does he sound like shit? Did he record this at the pool?"
And on that note, we'll see you next time.